Look, if you work search and rescue, SAR, in the Pacific Northwest, you learn to live with a certain kind of silence. I'm talking about the silence of the Olympic National Park, where the moss is so thick it drinks the sound of your own heartbeat. We have a rule out here. If the woods go quiet, you don't stop to wonder why. You just get out. Because when the mountain stops breathing, it's usually because it's focused on something. Specifically, it's focused on you. My name is Cooper. I've spent 15 years as a lead SAR technician. I've pulled hikers out of ravines and tracked hunters who've been lost for weeks. But the case of Leo, a 6-year-old boy who vanished in the Hoh rainforest in April 2023, is the reason I turned in my badge. Leo was standing 3 feet behind his father, picking up a cool-looking stone near a massive cedar tree. His dad turned his head to answer a question from Leo's mother, and when he turned back, not 5 seconds later, the boy was gone. No scream, no rustle of ferns, just a 6-year-old shaped hole in the universe. By the time my team arrived, the sun was dipping below the canopy, turning the forest into a cathedral of shadows. We were using FLIR, forward-looking infrared drones, but the heat signatures were a mess. The forest was bleeding thermal energy in a way that didn't make sense. "Cooper, I've got tracks," my partner Miller called out. I knelt down in the damp soil. There were the imprints of Leo's Paw Patrol light-up sneakers, but as I traced them with my tactical light, my stomach did a slow roll. The tracks started out normal, then the distance between the steps began to grow. 4 feet, 8 feet, 12 feet. No child can leap 12 feet between steps. It looked like something was pulling him upward and forward, his toes just barely scraping the dirt as he was dragged into the dark. "Dogs won't take the scent," Miller whispered, nodding toward our bloodhound Barnaby. The dog, who had tracked grizzly bears through snowstorms, was whimpering, his head tucked between his paws, refusing to face the deep brush. We pushed forward into a sector called the Green Labyrinth. Here, the trees are so tall they blot out the sky, and the air smells like wet stone and copper. My GPAs, a high-end Garmin diesel, started glitching. The map didn't show the forest anymore. It showed a series of concentric circles, and in the middle, a single word, pending. Suddenly, the electronic hum of my radio changed. It became a rhythmic, wet thumping. Thump, 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 like a giant heart beating inside the mountain itself. We reached a sheer basalt cliff, a 2,000-foot vertical wall of slick, black rock. Leo's track stopped dead at the base. I looked up, and my heart nearly stopped. 50 feet up, caught on a jagged pine branch sticking out of the cliff, was Leo's bright yellow rain jacket. "There's no way," Miller breathed. "No kid climbs a grade 5 vertical wall in the rain." I didn't wait. I hooked my harness to the rock and started the ascent. The basalt felt wrong. It wasn't cold, it was warm, vibrating with that same heartbeat I'd heard on the radio. As I climbed higher, a thick white mist rolled in, not from the sky but out of the rock itself. I reached the branch. The yellow jacket was there, fluttering in the wind. But as I reached out to grab it, I realized it wasn't empty. There was something inside the jacket, a tall, thin frame that shouldn't have fit. And when the thing turned its head to look at me, it didn't have a face. Its head was a solid, polished piece of gray obsidian, a mirror. I looked into that mirror face, and I didn't see my reflection. I saw my own funeral. I saw myself lying in a coffin, surrounded by my SAR team, but they were all wearing Leo's yellow jacket and whistling a song I hadn't heard since I was a child. I was hanging by a nylon rope 150 feet in the air, staring into a face that was nothing but a reflection of my own death. The thing, wearing Leo's yellow jacket, didn't move, but the heartbeat in the basalt cliff accelerated. Thump, thump, thump. My hands, usually steady as stone, began to shake. The mirror face of the entity started to ripple like water. The image of my funeral faded, replaced by something worse, a live feed of Miller, my partner, standing at the base of the cliff. But in the mirror face, Miller wasn't looking up at me. He was kneeling, digging into the dirt with his bare fingernails, his face twisted into a wide, silent scream. "Cooper." The voice didn't come from the creature. It came from my own radio, clear as a bell. It was Leo's voice. "He's almost done digging the hole for you. Why are you taking so long?" The entity reached out a long, spindly arm. Its fingers were like obsidian needles, clicking against each other. It didn't grab me. It touched the rope. With one light stroke, the heavy-duty climbing line rated for 5,000 pounds started to fray, not like it was being cut, but like it was aging. The vibrant orange nylon turned gray, brittle, and began to snap fiber by fiber. "Miller, lower me, now," I screamed into my mic. I looked down through the mist. Miller was standing exactly where I left him, but he wasn't moving. He was looking straight up at me, his tactical light illuminating his face. But his eyes were gone. In their place were two small, glowing LEDs, one red, one blue, blinking in perfect synchronization like Leo's sneakers. I kicked off the wall, attempting a desperate rapid rappel. The rope snapped when I was still 40 feet up. I hit the ground hard. The impact sent a jolt of white-hot pain through my left ankle, and the world went dark for a second. When I opened my eyes, the mist had turned a sickly, translucent green. I looked up. The creature on the cliff was gone. The yellow jacket was gone. "Miller," I wheezed, clutching my side. My partner turned toward me. The blinking LEDs in his eye sockets were so bright they left spots in my vision. He pointed toward a massive, ancient western red cedar tree, a tree we call a grandfather in the SAR community. "The boy isn't lost, co-opper," Miller said, his voice sounding like two stones grinding together. "He's been integrated. The mountain doesn't like loose ends." I looked at the base of the tree. There were Leo's light-up sneakers. They were neatly placed side by side as if he'd stepped out of them to go to bed. But as I looked closer, I saw that the sneakers weren't empty. Small, pale roots were growing out of the shoes, stitching them into the earth. And then, the tree started to scream. It wasn't a human scream. It was the sound of wood fibers stretching and snapping, modulated into the pitch of a 6-year-old child. The bark of the tree began to shift, forming the shape of a small face. Leo's face, stretched and distorted, 10 feet wide across the trunk. "Help!" "Me," the tree groaned. Suddenly, my radio erupted with voices, not my team. Every person I had ever failed to find in 15 years of search and rescue started calling my name. A chorus of the lost, coming from the trees, the rocks, and the very air I was breathing. I realized then that this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a harvest. I didn't think, I just ran. I ignored the agony in my ankle, the adrenaline masking the sound of my own ligaments tearing as I scrambled away from the grandfather cedar. Every time the red and blue lights in Miller's eye sockets blinked, the forest around me shifted, trees moving like giant wooden chess pieces to block my path. "You can't leave the tally, co-opper." Miller's voice boomed, but it was coming from the canopy now, 100 feet above my head. I reached a small clearing where we had set up a temporary relay antenna earlier that day. The gear was trashed. The metal tripod was twisted into a spiral, exactly like the one I'd seen in the cliffside mist. But lying in the center of the wreckage was my emergency flare gun. I grabbed it, loaded a 12-gauge red phosphorus shell, and didn't aim at the trees. I aimed at the ground, at the thick, oily moss that was trying to stitch my boots to the earth. Boom! The flare ignited the moss with a chemical roar. The forest let out a collective shriek. The hush shattered as the smell of burning ozone replaced the copper scent. For a second, the reality of the Pacific Northwest flickered. I didn't see trees. I saw giant, pulsating pillars of gray light reaching into a void. I didn't stop. I dragged myself toward the sound of a distant engine. The real world. The official report. The next morning, a secondary SAR team found Leo. He was sitting on a log, less than half a mile from where he originally vanished. He was wearing his yellow jacket. He had his Paw Patrol sneakers on. He was perfectly fine. Except for one thing, he wouldn't stop whistling a 3-note melody that sounded like a heartbeat. They found Miller, too. He was catatonic, leaning against a basalt wall. He told the investigators that I had suffered a psychotic break due to altitude sickness and that he'd had to restrain me, but I know what I saw. I saw the way Leo's parents hugged him when he was returned. I saw the way Leo looked over his mother's shoulder, straight at me. His eyes were normal. But when the camera flashes from the local news went off, red and blue, for a split second, his face didn't reflect the light. It was a mirror. And in that mirror, I saw myself, still hanging from that rope, 150 feet up, screaming into the mist. I retired the next day. I moved to the desert, somewhere with no trees, no moss, and no reflections. But every time I pass a mirror, I don't look at my own face. I look at the edges, because I know the mountain didn't let me go. It just gave me a longer rope. If you're ever hiking in the Olympic National Park, and you see a yellow jacket waving from a place no human should be, don't be a hero. Don't look for the child, because the Pacific Northwest doesn't have missing people. It has a very, very long memory.